In past interviews, you've described yourself as the misfit dean. So why did you say that?
Well, actually, where that came from, I was asked to write a reflection of my years as dean, and it was in the Ed magazine, and I entitled Reflections of a Retiring Misfit. Why? Because I was a complete misfit with most of the education that I had through college. I dropped out of the first grade, and I didn't like school. And I was 5 years old. And I remember, I went to my parents and said, look, I'm not going back to school. And they said, you have to go back to school. I said, compulsory education doesn't kick in until you're 6. So I dropped out. And
you were smart enough, though, to know the policy.
Right, it did. So at 6, I went back to school. And then I was in high school. I majored in girls and fishing. I mean, I did okay, but I wasn't interested in schooling. I went to a public high school, which actually in reflection was pretty good, but I wasn't there. And so I had this I felt like I was a misfit within the school. And then in college, I went to Columbia. I humbly say, because I think it's the truth, that my grades were pretty good but they weren't great because I was pretty smart. But I think I got into Columbia on the Irish quota. And I also taught my way into getting into Columbia, I think. And had an okay experience, but I didn't like school. And so the idea of being associated with school, or being in a school of education,
the leader of a school of education.
So it never crossed my mind. But I love working. I was a teacher. I taught mathematics for a while. I love that. And then I got this wonderful job working in Washington, D.C. on the war and poverty and trying to develop educational legislation. And I love that. So then I ended up, when Nixon was elected president, I was associate director of a program called the White House Fellows Program. And I had a White House pass, meant that I had this really plum job, but I was a public servant. I wasn't a political appointment. Nonetheless, I got fired because it was a plum job. So I found myself in 1969 without a job and not knowing what to do. And a friend of mine up here said, well, why don't you come up and get a doctorate? I said, I don't want to get a doctorate. So I said, well, what else are you going to do? Did you get a job? I said, oh, no, I haven't got a job. Well, why don't you come? So, and I loved it here. And it turns out that it felt like a good fit. So I call myself a misfit dean because I never in my wildest dreams would have believed that I had a career in having to do with education. Not in my wildest dreams would I thought I'd become a professor or a dean at Harvard. So I'm.
But you came up here, became part of the community, and that was it.
That was it. Well, I became part of the community. I love this community. I found out that I liked to do research more than I thought. I was older and more mature, which made a big difference. I think I was pretty immature in high school. And I was lucky in that I knew a lot about federal education legislation at the time when the ed school was beginning to get interested in federal educational policy. So it meant that I had access to some professors like David Cohen who were really interested in what I knew, and it helped me form some bonds and connections. So I kind of thrived once I got here, which I never would have predicted, and then I never would have thought. So.
And here we are years later.
Here we are years later. So.